What a day it is. Four of the top minds in the game join us to discuss the state of men's collegiate volleyball, Olympic volleyball, and plenty more for the next hour or so. But first off, guys, appreciate you joining us. I know it's hectic around here, and you guys are obviously taking time during your trip to Happy Valley. But, Pav, let's start things out by just kind of going around the table, introducing yourselves, and we'll start with you and give us your affiliation and how you kind of started playing the game.
Yeah, I'm Mark Pavlik, Penn State men's volleyball. My high school coach saw me in phys ed class playing basketball and said, "You look like you got some quick hands, quick feet. You want to try to play the game?" I'm still trying to play the game.
All right, let's go to your right.
Well, go to the left. That works.
Your left, yeah. I guess my right, your left.
Kevin Burch, Ohio State men's volleyball. I got started in volleyball actually my junior year of high school. I kind of fell into it, then kind of fell into coaching right after that with a friend, and then got to know Travis Turner from Balboa Bay Volleyball Club, and then got JUCO, and then transferred to Ohio State, and the rest is history.
John Speraw, head coach at UCLA and the men's national team. I grew up in a smaller city in Southern California of Arcadia, and they just randomly happened to have a really good volleyball program and great coach there who guided me through the process. Eventually ended up at UCLA, and here I still am at UCLA.
Look at that. Last but not least.
Jeff Nygaard, head coach of USC men's volleyball. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, which is known as a mecca of volleyball, so you just fall into that and it just leads to a place like this.
All right, so who around this table is the top talent if you look back on things?
Oh, it's not debatable. It's Pavlik.
Not debatable.
Not
No
debatable.
debate.
Yeah.
Not debatable.
It's
It's clearly Nygaard, one of the best players in UCLA volleyball history. It's really disturbing to all of us. He's wearing a Trojan, the Trojan letters, but the fact that he's become a great coach is not surprising. He not only was an unbelievable volleyball player, but a great intellect of the game while he was a player. That's. I don't think that's debatable around this table about who do we want to pick first if we were still going out to play.
Little draft pick. You're picking him.
He'd be the first draft pick. Yeah,
Love it.
And that is my Pepper partner speaking at it.
Yeah, and I made him really good at defense because I'm not that good at Pepper.
Pepper's like the little game you play back and forth, right?
That's
Absolutely.
right, Mitch.
Yeah.
And that means you're clearly the second pick.
Yeah. All right, so obviously we're here to discuss kind of the state of men's volleyball as a whole, but for you guys, you've been around the game for quite some time, but just kind of describe to me how you guys have seen this game grow over the years to really what it is today.
You know, I think over the years, from at least through my career, you've seen the game become more and more physical. You've seen us get bigger, faster, stronger athletes. Certainly from the mid to late 70s to where all of our student athletes are right now, the sizes, the strengths of them, it really is something that has made the game different than even when these guys played collegiately. And I think the other thing that we've noticed more, at least I have, I think the game that is being played at the international level that John's coaching is no longer trickling down. I think there's a waterfall effect. I think what we're seeing at the international level is starting to get to the collegiate level much faster than it ever has before. And those are the two big things that I'm seeing.
I'd certainly agree with that in terms of the sophistication of offenses, the style of play that's being played. People ask me a lot, as being the national team coach and the college team coach, what are the differences? And I think it is more physical at the international level. Guys are hitting the jump serve a little bit harder, and they're definitely jumping and hitting it higher. But at the end of the day, the offenses really aren't that much different. We're doing a lot of the same sophisticated things that the international game is doing at the university level now. So I think you're spot on with that.
Would you credit today's media and access to it and the visual, the ability to watch something like, as an example, you see Ingapeth do that on two jump like he's going to attack and then sets to the go, and all of a sudden somebody in our gym's doing it, and I never even thought about talking about that.
Right.
And all of a sudden that access to watching Brazil, watching you guys, watching the Italians, whomever, people are able to digest that even better, easily, and say, that's what I should be doing. It's like watching Michael Jordan back in the day. It's like, that's how I want to play basketball. I mean, that for me was a big driver. It's like I'd watch a game and all of a sudden I go out and just work on my jump shot. Not that it was anywhere near the same realm, but still, it's just that access that you get with all those clips and YouTube and whatever you have. Is that some reason that it's easily disseminated down?
I mean, I think so. I think you're exactly right. I remember we have a young freshman at UCLA, Maz, our setter. He's a big guy, and a lot of his release needs some technical work. And I just went right to YouTube and pulled up a bunch of setters. I wanted to see a bigger setter, so I went to Gianelli, the Italian setter, and just watched his release and slow-moed it all on YouTube, just so you could see it in 2 seconds. And I think that comparison and learning that's available to these young men now it's incredible.
How do you think that will continue to evolve as the years go by? And we have no idea what the media landscape is going to look like 10, 15 years from now. Who knows what it is? You could have holograms or whatever it is out there to practice some stuff. But how do you think that will continue to evolve? And like you said, you can have things on a click, if you will.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's more about just being more available and more convenient than it ever has been before. I think, the more accessible that it is, the more likely it's going to be to transfer into our gyms.
Yeah, you when you look at it comparatively through, again, our histories, mid-'70s, I was, 75, I was 15, 16, started to get into the game. I had Volleyball magazine. That was the only thing that came out that I could watch pictures. Like Al Skates was the first name I knew because I think that was the first article I read. And then it'd be interesting, 15 years later, what did you guys have besides, Volleyball magazine was still being printed, but was there more at the time when you guys were?
No. I don't think there's that much of a difference. I think the acceleration of technology recently with video, YouTube, some of the technologies we use today, huddles, volumetrics, and how we're disseminating our own videos and observing each other and learning. I can go online right now through volumetrics and watch all my guys playing overseas, and that's something that we had zero access to before. So, yeah, it's Mitch. If you knew where the technology would take us, I'd fire my stockbroker and call you. So.
How about let's start at the lower tier level. So obviously everybody starts playing this game at some point in time, but let's jump to the high school level. How have you guys seen really the game grow at that level, especially when you're out on the recruiting trail of things?
Well, it just recently came out that men's boys volleyball is the fastest growing high school sport in the country right now. I think we're number 1, lacrosse number 2. Did you guys see that list?
I don't actually know. It's definitely it's over the last 5 years, 21%.
Yeah. So we got boys, I think, for everything that these guys just mentioned. Volleyball is a hot sport right now. And all the traditional pockets of volleyball are still there, still going strong. But the exciting future of it is, where is the next hot pocket going to come out? We're looking at Minnesota. We're looking at Colorado. Mm-hmm. What other ones are out there?
South Carolina, Georgia. I think it's interesting in terms of just even observing what's going on at the collegiate level and what we've been able to see. And obviously Ohio State, Penn State, after they won that championship in '94, and then a little bit of a gap there, and then all of a sudden this explosion of talent has come out of the Midwest in particular. And we're seeing guys come from obviously Aaron Russell on the national team right now from the East Coast, and Matt Anderson, Buffalo, New York. Max Holt, these are all Nittany Lions from Ohio. So there's guys, more and more guys, not just Nygaard from Wisconsin, but now there's more and more guys coming from the Midwest and the East on the national team, and it's coming up through the collegiate ranks. Ohio State winning a couple championships, Loyola Chicago winning a couple championships. So I think that's where you really see how it's impacting the university game. And we need to continue to build that and work on that. So and we are in a lot of ways. So I think it's growing, and I think like Pav said, it's growing in the right direction. We've started a foundation called the First Point Volleyball Foundation to specifically target this area for us. For a long time, we've talked in circles like this about how are we going to grow men's volleyball. I think a lot of people look to USA Volleyball to potentially do that, and now that I've been in USAV for quite some time, I don't think they have the bandwidth for it. They have a lot of constituencies. The CEO of USA Volleyball, Jamie Davis, has a lot on his plate. regions, youth tournaments, the national teams, Paralympic. There's just a lot going on there. So we started an independent 501c3 3.5 years ago, and we've raised about $3.5 million and started 17 programs in that period of time. And one of the initiatives that we've been very proud of that occurred organically, wasn't part of our original process, was to grow high school boys volleyball, to get to your question. And so we now have a high school advocacy committee, and it's been really, really successful. Minnesota's probably the area where we're most proud of right now. We talked to Hugh McCutcheon and asked him to go meet with the people at Minnesota, and they're now over 1,000 boys in just a little over 18 months. And so the work that's being done out there is a blueprint for us, as is what's been going on in Colorado. So Scott Siegfried, who's a member of our board, has a son that was growing up in Colorado, and no opportunities for him to go play. So he took it upon himself before First Point was ever something he knew much about. We found him and recruited him because what he had done in Colorado is really the blueprint for how we should grow sanction and the sport in a lot of different states that don't have it right now. So Scott got it sanctioned in Colorado, so there's now over 1,000 boys in Colorado. So we're working on other states right now, and we continue to hope to continue to build off of the last 21%, maybe even accelerate that with some intentional effort, and see if we can. A lot of these areas are actually going to benefit PAV. So I don't. Maybe I should reconsider what we're doing here. But
but to that point, 10, 15, 20 years ago, our rosters were all pretty regionalized.
Right.
Now, they're, everybody has East Coast kids, West Coast kids, Southern Florida kids. It's becoming more of you could pick a roster out of a hat, and they're very homogenized. They look very similar.
I could think back to Wisconsin right now because they did a little bit of a demographic search about the high school, and I think CTE with football actually has been a big boom just to going into a fall sport like volleyball, because that used to be the one that they go into, but nobody really wants to play that game right now back in Wisconsin. So they're going into other sports, and it's really affecting the landscape.
Interesting.
So how has that made the recruiting side of things so much more competitive? Because you say it used to be regionalized, so I'm thinking Penn State, Northeast, Midwest for Ohio State, and southern side of the country for you guys. But how has that made it more competitive on the recruiting trail, knowing that PAV can come out to California and recruit a kid, you can come over here and recruit a kid in Boston or whatever it is?
It is interesting that is something you see quite a bit more of. I mean, Burch, do you have any SoCal guys on your team right now?
Yeah, we have a few.
Right.
I mean, yeah, and we have. Well, my question for you too is how many Chicago guys were, on UCLA's roster or UCLA or USC's roster at the time that you went back there versus what it's like now?
How many guys? Well,
Rich Bland,
New York,
Buffalo
New York
guy.
Yeah, that had to be about it, right?
And then Hawaii was a big feeder.
Hawaii's always been a big feeder. They usually stopped at California, so I'm not sure what it is now. But I think you're right. I mean, if you look at Burch's roster, he's got guys. That's what's interesting to me. Isn't just that we're starting to pick off more and more talent in Southern California, but Southern California talent, where it's still the largest talent base by far in terms of number of boys. It's also where it's the largest growth rate. But those guys are now willing to go back east and look at the Midwest because they're viable options for them to go play.
It seems to be there's a common theme amongst you guys, and you're going into people's homes and at their schools and telling them why you should come to their school. There's a whole recruiting pitch and what goes into that. I'm not going to sit here and ask you what your recruiting pitch is, but it comes off like you guys are friends. And when you look around college athletics, whether it's football, basketball, whatever it is, I'm not going to sit there and say that some of those coaches are enemies or anything like that, but they're definitely not going to sit around and necessarily have a discussion like this. So how have you guys, through the recruiting process, through friendships, through, weekends like this when you're going head-to-head against each other, how have you guys kind of had those relationships and really grown the game together?
I really think that we are one of the healthiest examples of competition. You had great players like these guys that competed against us, now become great coaches, and their own teams are kids that work real hard to compete. But the fact of the matter is, and we're such a small group, relatively speaking, with the number of coaches out there. If you want to take advantage and get to know each other, you can. And I think we're all fundamentally transparent. This is who we are. And we're very accepting of that. At least these guys are accepting of me. And I think that it's one of the best things about the men's game. We all are working hard to try to grow it, to try to make sure that the kids that we have on our team have just an outstanding experience, not only in our gym but at our institutions. I think we recognize the fact that everybody's teams work really hard, and I think we appreciate the work that everybody puts into it. I hope this is something that never changes. I joke with these guys all the time. I just wish we could get together when volleyball didn't get in the way. And it's one of the more refreshing aspects to my job, in my opinion, that I wouldn't trade this fraternity for the world.
I wonder if the fact that we have been small and we have had to work together to grow the game and we've had to be collaborative. I know that we all agree that our rules should be similar to the international rules because I think we all want our national teams to be good. I've always felt that way even before I was the national team coach. And I think because we've been collaborative, because we've been small, because we've had to work hard, because we're empathetic to maybe that our budgets aren't where they need to be, or I don't know. I think it's been very collegial, and I think as we continue to grow, we'll have to hold on to that.
Well, and I think you pointed out with you take a look at the demographics over the past 40 years of who plays men's volleyball, and you look at that relatively small demographic. And you start to look at the sport at its highest levels. 84 gold, 88 gold, 92 bronze, 2008 gold, 16 bronze. Not putting any pressure on John, but 2020, if he can straighten those former Nittany Lions out, we might have a shot.
That is the key.
Yeah. But you look at that, and then you look at, and these guys have played overseas. You start to look at the demographics that Brazil, Poland, Russia, Italy have in how their youth develops. And you got to sit there and say, how do we do it? And I think the collaborative effort of the coaches on the men's side, I think it was interesting. I had it described to me within the last 6 months. Somebody had said it seems to them that you take all of our founding coaches, the Colemans and the McGowans, and it's a forest where those trees are near each other and branches overhang, and there's not a whole lot of other standalone trees. And in some other sports, it's a field with a tree here, a tree there. They made the comment to me that they thought that because of how collaborative we've become and the ideas that have been shared and built upon over time has really helped the men's game here in this country.
There's a lot of meat in what you just said there.
Yeah, I'm from LA, so you lost me at trees.
Well, you're west of the 405.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the gold medals, the growth of the game and stuff like that, where is men's volleyball in the United States compared to the international scene, knowing that the Olympics are coming up in 2020?
There you go, John.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bert.
Yeah. Where are we in terms of the development?
Mm-hmm.
I think we have some expectations about what some other countries are doing to develop their talent. I don't actually know that for a fact. We always say there's more players playing in X country. I don't know that that's the case. I do think that the fact that other countries have professional leagues and it's been a part of television audiences, more popular in other countries, that they do have access to a broader talent base in terms of the top-end talent that's within their country. So for us right now, because so many young boys are playing the game and have access to scholarships on the basketball side, more and more of the tall guys are going to go play basketball. I was in Student Activity Center at UCLA, and I walked in, and Baron Davis was there shooting hoop. This is last week. And I went up and chatted with him for a little bit. And he actually, we were talking about diversity within the sport. This is getting off your question here in a second, but we now have 5 black guys on our team, which is probably the most of ever. And he noticed, which was really interesting. So we only exchanged some pleasantries, and he goes, "Hey man, there's black guys playing the game." And I go, "Yeah." And we're working on that. And I told him a little bit about how the First Point Volleyball Foundation, to circle back to First Point, had just gave $1 million grant to the SIAC, a Historical Black College Conference in the South. And that this is something we've been talking about, how do you diversify your sport. And he said, "I wish I'd known about this years and years ago. I can think of all the guys that were 12, 13, 14 on my bench who were jumping out of the gym who were terrible at basketball." and I think that's what we've been thinking about for a long time is, are we accessing all the talent that could potentially be available? I think in other countries they probably do a better job of that. I know right now you go play a match in Poland, it's sold out. Even when we played the World Championship,
and we're not
game,
talking 4,000 people.
No. I mean, there was 15,000 people at a match when we played Italy in the World Champs. Poland wasn't even in it. That's how popular that sport is right now. You go to a lot of countries, and we went politically. I know we're not going back for a little while, but when we went to Iran a couple years ago, it was incredible. The fan base that was there, 20,000 people. I was in a press conference with 100 people. So you're in these countries where they are getting exposure to their most talented athletes within that country. And so, as Pav alluded to, we oftentimes think, how have we been so good? How have we won gold medals? And for me, part of the motive to try and grow the game, and really the reason why I got involved with First Point, is when I got the job, the second quad, as head coach of the national team, I felt it was my responsibility to do something about it. Once you're coaching the first quad, you're just trying to figure it all out. Once you get the second quad, which nobody really has an opportunity to do, I felt like it was something I really wanted to dive into, which is what started the whole thing. And so I think it is going to require some intentional effort to try and build up the scholarship base, to get access to those talented players, to do a better job, because I don't think we should be sitting around here 20 years from now asking, how did we do that? I think we should know. And I don't think the answer should be, which I kind of wonder if it is, were we lucky? Which is always a little part of the factor. I think it's 100%. I think it's a lot about luck. I mean, let's look back at '84. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Karch Karai. So what happened there is you have one guy whose dad immigrated from Hungary, where he was familiar with the sport, and started playing Karch on the beach as a young man and developing him. That's a big part of why that team was good. And it's just this serendipitous route to get to where he was. And I think if you look at a lot of those guys, there is a small pool of talent that happened to produce a certain number of guys that were good enough to go play at a high level and win. And we shouldn't even start about the good fortune of 2008. But I mean, there's a lot of stories and storylines that lead to this success. And I think if we are doing our job as coaches and we're being responsible towards the future, we have to make sure that we play the odds. We need to create more stories. We need to have more of those serendipitous moments occur because we've expanded the talent base, so that when we're all here talking about the old days and some other coaches are coaching, that we're enjoying what we see and we win more gold medals when we're sitting on the couch.
I've always felt luck and timing has a big part of this. Mm-hmm. And when you're talking about this sort of scenarios, it feels like most of the other countries, like let's take Brazil by example. It's like they'll peak at around 19 because of the way that they structure things, in my opinion. And then Americans, because we don't have access to that high-level volleyball at an early age, we have to go play overseas. We start peaking later, 27 to 33-ish. But I look back at those teams, and you're right. I mean, how did that happen? That was lightning in a bottle. So is that speaking a little bit to the appeal in the international community of bringing in the Americans because they have that X factor that doesn't make any sense, and that we want something that they have. How do they, without any type of feeder channels, win gold medal after gold medal?
Well, now you're getting to a cultural question that we've often debated too, about just the work ethic that they all want from our guys. And I think that is there. I also wonder about the collegiate model and how beneficial that is. You take 4 years of this developmental phase and you put them all with the same age in a fairly collaborative environment, supportive environment, whereas the professional young guys that you're referring to, the 19-year-old that you see pop up in a lot of other countries, they're thrown into the fire. And so that personal growth factor that is really involved in hopefully what we're all doing and attempting to do in our collegiate environment. This is about the development of the student athlete. And I think we all understand, and I think our athletic departments all understand that it's about holistic development of a student athlete. And so when our student athletes are then the age of 22, 23, and they're moving off into playing professional volleyball, in this example with guys that have that talent on the national team, I believe they're in a better social place to handle that responsibility. I think they've probably had a little bit more strength and conditioning developing. That's been specific. The volume has actually been lower, so maybe they're starting off at a later spot, but maybe that does allow them a little bit more longevity. But you are starting to see that some guys internationally are not flaring out at 19. Like, they're doing a better job of managing themselves and peaking at the same time as we are. And so we're going to have to make sure we continue to work on this and innovate. But I think you're right. I mean, you talk to agents and what they're looking for, and they are all looking for an American because they want that culturally for their team because they know that guy is going to come in and work.
Because there's no 4-year quote-unquote structured plan like you're getting with student athletes here. That's what you're basically referring to across the globe. If
That's
you will.
right. Yeah, if you're a young guy in Brazil, as Nygaard's model was referring to, if you're a young player, you immediately go through their professional clubs in their youth development program. And so if you are a good 19-year-old player, you end up on their pro team at a young age playing with guys that are 28, 32, whatever. You're playing on that same team with them, which allows them to grow at a younger age. But then you just got to wonder about this social, psychological development phase that they're missing.
Well, and to your point about volume too, they're playing year round
Yeah.
at an early age too, whereas the guys wear shorter seasons, so then they get, to your point again, they're not playing year round at that high level until they're 22, 23.
Right.
So I think that delays it a little bit too.
This is a little bit off topic, but I want your guys' input on this, being 4 of the elite coaches in this sport. But sports in general, when you look at the high school athletes, let's say you're going out to recruit somebody in the state of Minnesota, right? How important is it that these kids are playing multiple different sports? Because I think that's such a hot topic around the sports landscape, if you will, right now, looking for those multi-sport athletes because, like you guys are alluding to, some people are peaking or maxing out or whatever you want to call it in that one specific sport way too early.
I think that's very true. I think we all look at some of the best players we've had in our programs, and they've been multi-sport kids. And I'm not so sure that certainly being a multi-sport athlete, where you're using different movement patterns, different muscle groups over the course of a relatively condensed season, let's say 3 months of football, 3 months of basketball, 3 months of volleyball, 3 months of baseball, run that through. I think there's another hidden issue here too. I think I would like to get an idea of those multi-sport athletes, how many of them played unstructured type of sports, backyard football, basketball, volleyball. And I think volleyball, we're still, at least on the men's side, especially with the beach, it's still, hey, I'll meet you down here at 10, let's play all day. I think for all the great things that structured youth sports does for the sport, providing experience for the athletes, I think the one thing that we need to do a better job of is take some of that structure away and let those kids solve their own competitive issues. I think there's something about on the playground, Jeff and I are against each other for one day, and we get into a little bit of a shoving match because I'm fouling him and I'm not calling it, or he's doing, and our buddies have to separate us, and the next day we pick sides, and the next day him and I are on the same team. We got to figure out how to make that work, and we do. Now I'm afraid that when that happens in a structured club-like setting, who steps in? Coaches, parents, and they get more involved. And we don't get the chance to figure out that competitive interpersonal dynamic at a young age that I think some of us who grew up in an unstructured youth development, just backyards, figured it out. And we see kids come into our programs, at least I do, where it's like, hey, can you tell this guy to, no, you tell him. I'll give you some things to think about and how to approach it, but don't expect me to jump in and tell you how to be a teammate and how to talk to teams. I think that's a big issue that goes right along with the multi-sport kid. I'd like to see a little bit less structure, but still have the opportunities that they're having today.
I like exploring the psychological aspect of what you just did there, but I would kind of filter it down to if you play one sport since 12 all the way up to 18, typically what I've observed is that you've made that starting team at an early age, and if somebody comes into that dynamic that may challenge you, it could go one of two ways, and all of a sudden they're jumping ship to go to a different club team. Yeah. But if you play multi-sports, we grew up and we played, 4 different sports, 3 months. If you think of it in this psychological sense of dominance hierarchies, how are you in that environment for 3 months going to find your way to getting to the top of that? You build up a certain psychological way of, this is what I need to do, this is how I get to there, this is how I work, this is how I identify with my teammates, this is how I can use this and all these different things. If you're doing that cyclically 4 times a year, you grow up a certain amount of grit, if you want to call it. And so you go into another environment, you're prepared. You have some type of internal drive within you that knows how to get to the top of that and continue being at the top of that. If you're somebody that develops as 14 as that man-child, do you really psychologically develop later in life, or have you just ridden on your talent to a point and all of a sudden that kid that's that late bloomer all of a sudden shows up 6'8", jumping 40? Who's prepared for that moment? Is it the one who had to learn how to work and then all of a sudden they were gifted with the 6'9" frame that came out late, or someone who hadn't had to develop beyond his physical? I would go with the person that had to work their tail off to get to that point every time.
Mm-hmm. Learn how to deal with adversity a little
Learn
bit too.
Definitely. Sure.
So you brought up a very interesting point about diversity within the sport. I want to go back to that conversation. How have you, the rest of you, really seen diversity within the sport kind of grow over the years?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I agree with Baron Davis. I watched our guys shoot hoops, and they too would be the 12th, 13th, 14th that can't play basketball on any team. Yeah. It's been, I'm trying to remember, Dane was probably the first at Pepperdine that I remember playing. We had Eric Houston back in '99, African Americans, and now I just think I'm real curious to see where the SIAC takes this over the next 5 to 6 years.
Well, that's been a real interest to me too. That started about a year ago with our CEO, Wade Gerard, meeting the commissioner of the SIAC, Greg Moore, who's a really progressive, thoughtful guy. A lot of those historical black colleges are trying to figure out how to make it happen financially. And he's been able to sign sponsorship deals with Nike. He's just really a thoughtful guy. And he and Wade met and started talking, and it led to a weekend getaway for all the presidents and ADs of the SIAC to come out to Utah, where our supporter, Scott Stowell, has a home. And BYU was playing McKendree, coached by Nikki, African-American, female, which is probably the model that the SIAC is going to use potentially for half those schools is hiring their women's coach to coach the men's team. And Hawaii and Princeton. And here we are in Utah, beautiful home, Park City, and we had an opportunity to sit down one of the nights it was a 3-night event, and fortunately for us, UCLA's on the quarter system, so we were off. That happened to be our finals week. So I was there, and we had a dinner, and it was literally just a dinner with me and the presidents and the ADs to discuss the game and what it is and really tell them about what volleyball is and what we can do. And it was about a 3-hour dinner just talking about that issue. And the number one thing that I talked about, Pav, was this is going to be a collaborative opportunity for all of us, because as you look to go into underserved populations in areas of this country that don't understand volleyball or don't know about volleyball, it's easier when there's an advocate that looks like you. And maybe that's selling myself a little short, but I think if a young African American male is watching somebody on TV and they say, hey, there's Kofi Jima and he's flying around and doing some incredible things, and I want to be like him. How do I do that? I think we all identify with what we see, and we need to have some more cultural representatives within those communities. And I think the SIAC gives us an avenue to do that. So I'm excited about that. I think that's going to be very interesting to see. And we're going to start, the whole idea is you get scholarships at the top, people are going to say, hey, there's an opportunity for me there. And so as we add 18 scholarships for boys of color in the United States of America starting next year, there's going to be something that's going to happen in the club volleyball world, where all of a sudden all these African American boys are going to start getting some scholarships, and they're going to start seeing it more, and they're going to see it on TV and certainly streaming, and they're going to hopefully say, hey, that's something I want to do.
Yeah, the moms and dads who are alums of those schools,
right,
who know what kind of education they receive there, now all of a sudden are saying, oh, we got a chance here. Hey, let's take a look at this.
And we're going to have guys that are on their basketball teams at Morehouse or Central Valley or Benedictine that are going to say, hey, I want to play that as soon as the season's over. And then they're going to go and do that. It's going to be super interesting, I think. I don't think it'll take too long before you see a real impact and hopefully somebody on the national team that's coming from the SIAC down the road.
Kevin, what do you think the stereotype overall of men's volleyball is, knowing that, like you're saying, Coach, of being able to relate to somebody that comes into a certain situation in a household or demographic, whatever it is? What do you think the stereotype of men's volleyball is in general?
Well, I mean, I think it's a lot of that's revolved around where those, hotbeds of volleyball are, right? It started in Southern California with, the beach communities where guys are playing a lot. And so it's, it started in a lot of affluent areas. So I think the stereotypes revolve around that. And I think the same thing revolving in Chicago. It was a lot around beach volleyball, over the summers, and that's where a lot of those guys start and where they get a lot of touches. I think, it's a repetition sport like golf. So you're not going to get a LeBron James coming on a volleyball court and be good day one. So it takes time, and I think that's why Southern California will always be a hotbed, because guys are playing a lot more on the beach and, without those structured environments. But getting back to your question, I think it's a lot around those affluent areas again, and I think it's going to be tough to change that. But I think the more opportunities that we get at the younger levels, with the high schools growing so much, you're going to see more diverse opportunities, and I think the more diverse coaches you get at the youth levels, that's what's really going to start driving that growth, along with the scholarship opportunities.
What is the club level like of men's volleyball at the lower levels, higher levels, whatever it is? What's a club setting like for somebody? I'm thinking women's volleyball right now. I'm going to tournaments all weekend. Is it similar? What aspects of the club level, what does that look like?
I think it's fairly sane on the men's side. We don't have to be out weekend after weekend after weekend. And, I think that what we're seeing is the numbers that we're at right now. The club coaches are doing a good job in getting their teams into competitions enough that those kids have the opportunity to just compete for 2-3 days every 3-4 weeks, maybe let's say every 2 to 3 weeks. But I don't think their bodies are getting beat up because of it. I don't know, that you guys are the hotbed of Southern California, where you literally could have a weekend or a tournament every weekend. Where are your takes on that?
Well, I can't help but think a little bit more globally about this topic, because we're talking about growth of the game, and I happen to compete in a few Olympics, and back then we didn't, other than the pocket that we were in, nobody knew we existed. And so you go to the Olympics, and we're one of the top 3 watched sports that there is. And I mean, it's so compelling of a sport, and you're talking about diversity in the sport. You're watching us compete against Cuba and all these other things, and that is that snapshot at that time that people wake up and go, oh my gosh, I had no idea that this is what men's volleyball really was. And now you're talking about the growth of high school and all these different demographics opening up, all the initiative that John's talking about with Front Point. There's a lot of great things happening, and it's not just that top-down model. It's also the grassroots growing up, and in the middle, we're just benefiting from all these different things because we've got the role models. We had women's volleyball with Kiri and Misty winning 3 gold medals. It's just ballooned. I think that we're talking about the Midwest winning some national titles has really swung a pendulum, so to speak, to validate a lot of those other pockets coming out. So volleyball is blooming, in my opinion.
Do you guys cross-reference with the women's programs within your universities and stuff like that? Do you work with them a lot, and what does that look like around the country?
I think all of us here are benefit from that relationship. If you look at the universities that have won women's national championships, and I don't remember the number right off the top of my head, but it's like 32 of 36 of the championships or something along those lines have been won by a school that also has a men's volleyball program. So we have long wondered, not studied, but wondered if there's a symbiotic relationship between having both a men's and women's program on your campus. I feel it. Obviously, the women's coach at UCLA is Mike Seeley. We all played together, so we're good friends. Even with women's beach, now that's booming too. Stein Metzger, all of us were teammates together, and we're all in the same hall. So we do collaborate quite a bit. We talk a lot. We share a facility with Mike, so when it gets to the end of the year, I'm asking him what he has left in his budget and what we can purchase with it. And so I think there is quite a bit to be said for that. I think just building off of what Jeff said, I think the sport is really, really growing, and we need to – I think probably for a long time when we talk about some of the older names you mentioned before, Pav, there was probably a lot of bitterness about Title IX. And I can understand that. I mean, here's a guys that were doing this in the 50s and 60s, and things were rolling, and there was over 100,000 boys playing, and then Title IX gets implemented, and there was lots of cuts. And I could see where the old school, old guard was upset about that. I think we're over that. And I know that I think our greatest advantage as a sport right now is the fact that the women's game has been built up as much as it has been. And I think all of us are progressive around this table and understand that. And so now it's an opportunity for us to build off of that. And you go to matches at Ohio State and Penn State, and maybe not UCLA and SC yet, but we've been talking with First Point with a lot of Big Ten ADs. And I had a sit-down with Dr. Jim Phillips at Northwestern about it. And early on, because we wanted to just actually pick his brain about an AD, an influential AD, who didn't have men's volleyball and what his take was on it. And he was just so gracious with his time. And they are very aware of the Big Ten Network ratings, and they think that the Big Ten Network has actually really driven attendance because there's somebody sitting at home who hasn't been exposed to the game that sees it on TV and goes, wait a minute, I think I want to go see that. And then that's built attendance, and then they've run great events, and next thing you know, you look at all the attendance figures at Wisconsin, Minnesota, they're selling out. Nebraska, obviously, they've been doing great for quite some time. But all of a sudden, you're starting to see arenas starting to sell, and ADs are taking notice. And so I think as a sport, we ought to be right behind them saying, hey, we can do that too. And we can. It doesn't take much to think about what a marketing effort would be to piggyback off of a successful women's volleyball program and think that you get 50% of their ticket sales if you worked at it. And I think that's a message that I think would resonate with ADs as we're trying to grow the sport. Our biggest issue in terms of like how it's perceived, which is another facet of your question, it is perceived right now in a lot of places as a girls' sport. So we have to somehow change that narrative and understand how it's being perceived and how we address that, and show lots of videos of guys getting hit in the face and bloodied up. I think is probably where we need to go.
So how do you do that though? Like,
yeah, it's a great question.
How do you do it?
I think one of the best things NBC did in 2016, they had a infographic where they had the net, and they had 8 feet. And then they had basketball rim, 10 feet. Then they had the square above the rim, 11 feet. Then they had the top of the backboard, 12 feet. Then they had a picture of Maddie Anderson swinging at a ball at 12'3". And just that visual was like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what we talked about earlier with the video and the availability of modeling occurring,
Mm-hmm.
I think we've got to find ways to take and you, Mitch, you and I have talked about, we've got to get a radar gun in rec hall. I want to see what Austin was serving last night, and I know you guys have it. Do you guys have radar gun in Galen? Yeah, we're the only.
Now, is that
one.
something that radar gun, like you're putting that up during a match so people can see that type of stuff, like a fastball in baseball?
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they love it.
Because now, I'm remembering Zaitsev hitting 70.
God, could you please pick somebody else?
Okay. Maddie's hitting 72, 73 miles an hour on a jump serve. And you start to draw the picture for those fans that we're trying to bring into the game or let them understand how the men's game differs from the women's game. 72 miles an hour, and if he tosses the ball into the court and hits it, let's say he hits it at 7 feet inside the court. Court's 60 feet long, right? The passer, let's say he's 8 feet inside his end line, tries to control the ball there. You've just knocked 15 feet out of the 60 feet area. Have you tried to hit a 72-mile-an-hour fastball from Little League distance? No. And I think the physicality of the men's game is what we really need to promote. And we got to do it in some ways that grab the attention of the average sports fan. And I'm thinking the what ESPN used to have, the sports science, where they did all kind of cool, here was the range of catch or whatever.
It's like the most obscure relations.
But
cool.
You'd look at it and say, okay, so he's a garage door, and you could throw it anywhere in a garage door, and he's going to catch it. I think those are the things that we really need to highlight. We have to separate. If we say we're bigger, stronger, faster, what does that really mean?
Well, I think you got to do it to the right areas too. I think the stigma that you talked about is very regionalized. Like if you look at it in Southern California, it's not look nearly as much like a girl sport because it's more accepted. Chicago, same thing. I think Florida, same thing. Mm-hmm. You get into the Midwest, like Kansas City, and you get Des Moines, Iowa, those areas where girls volleyball is huge, but boys volleyball is really small. That's where
Texas.
Yeah, I think that's where you target, that media, those types of things, because that's where that stigma exists the most. Doing clinics there this fall, you saw that a lot because all the sisters are playing, and then those are the guys that are playing now, but everybody else just has that stigma. It's a girls' sport. But I think if we can change that narrative in that area specifically, I think it can make a big difference.
But is that the only slice of it? Is it only that it's a girls' sport in those demographics, or is it also the accessibility and the people that can attach to women's volleyball because that resembles how they would play the game? More of, if you're watching somebody play a backyard volleyball game,
sure,
nobody's going to be cranking the ball at 72 miles an hour unless it's, spraying to a back window or something. And so it's like people can attach to something that resembles what they're going to do more. So it may not just be that women kind of hold the sway with the whole thing, but also is like when you watch a Matt Anderson or the unmentionable names, like how many people can literally do that and have the ability to play at that level? I mean, is that something also that they might want to explore, is that they don't get exposure to that enough to say that I could do that, I want to do that, I want to pursue doing that. Like when I watch, take your tennis pro, and they're hitting at 140 miles an hour, I just look at that and I say, I can't do that. I'm just not physically capable of doing that. I watch it with wonderment, and I have no idea how you can react to a ball that small and then just bring it back with pace and power and all those different things. I have a harder time watching men's tennis than I do. I love watching women's tennis because it's a lot of long rallies. I mean, you're seeing a lot of strategies. You're having to work on stamina, all those different things. I actually enjoy that more than just the power game.
Well, but what happens if we build on your wonderment? That's my question. Where does that take us? If you're actually making a conscious thought, wow, that he's really, how does he do that? How do we build on that? How do we use that as a hook to get the people in that are smart enough to say, that's different? I think that's a question.
Knowing all that, everything that we just discussed, I want to kind of go around the table and get your guys' thoughts. If you were king for a day, or if you were a commissioner, or you were somebody of massive power that could change the game, what elements of the game would you change moving forward? Let's go left to right.
Starting over here.
Yeah.
Elements of the game itself. That's a great question, because when I was playing, so many things changed that I was able to just step back far enough and realize it's like the changes of the rules really didn't affect the game, in my opinion. There's always that knee-jerk reaction, like you play it on the beach. Let's go 1 meter in. All of a sudden, for 3 years, nobody thinks they can jump serve until one guy goes out there and is smashing everyone with their jump serve, and everyone's like, oh, we can do that still. And then everyone starts jump serving. So what would I change about the game? Well, in the model of beach volleyball, I really wouldn't travel to another country to play one match to find out if you're in the tournament or not. I'd find another way of doing that so that you're just not crushing everyone's body and all the different resources to go into that. In terms of volleyball in America, it would be great to get a little bit more funding for everybody so that we could have a much more level playing field for guarantees that teams are going to have opportunity. That would be a real nice thing to make sure that just looking at the landscape, it's like we have the challenge system here. And I don't think men's teams can afford a challenge system of how you guys have it, with the clarity, with the vision, with the cameras. And I think that's a nice piece of growth and innovation that's happened to the game. It would be nice that everyone is able to procure that and have that in their gym so that we can be a little bit more across the board on equal terms.
Pav?
2 things. I'd do away with double contact. I'd get rid of it. And
That's like a head shake from everybody around the table, it appears.
It's funny because I've read some comments from people saying, well, if you get rid of the double contact, you're going to have setters that are just going to do anything to the ball. It's going to look ugly. And the best analogy I can think of is, again, arguably one of the toughest things in sport is to hit a 95-mile fastball that's thrown from 60 feet 6 inches away. For over 100 years, a batter could step into the batter's box if he's right-handed, and he could take his left hand. I'm sorry, this is the right hand. Put it on the bottom of the bat, left hand on top. Umpire's not going to call him out for lack of technique. Why don't we see every batter, or more than at least one in the majors, do that? It's not the most efficient way to do it. We get rid of the double contact. Is it going to change how John or Jeff or Kevin coaches his setters to contact the ball? No, coaches are still going to coach the most efficient way for a setter to use his hands to get the ball in a consistent spot time after time. But it takes judgment of technique out of our game. Outside of gymnastics, is there another sport where an official judges technique and awards a point to an opponent for poor technique? I can't think of one. Let's get rid of it in volleyball. Let the officials decide, hey, did that ball hit the antenna first or it hit the antenna, then the block, or the block, then the antenna? Was it in and out? Let the crime be the punishment. If my setter cannot deliver a hittable ball, these guys are saying, yeah, we'll make you pay for it. Let's not look for an official to award us a point. Second thing I'd like to do is I would like to have a discussion on substitutions. I like the 6 subs. I think that's something that makes our game pretty special. Guys have to, for the most part, our outside hitters have to play the whole game. But right now, with 6 subs, I can really only bring in 3. And I can only do it once. So Kev's our front row, bring John in to serve for him. John comes back out. He can't go back in. Kev can only go back in. We're done. Why can't we take the 6, and if we have a great server, let him serve 3 times. If we have somebody that's an outstanding blocker, let him get into the game 3 times. And just let us have, as coaches, a little bit more of a hockey matchup mentality. But I don't want to see us. I don't think we need to go past 6. I'm with, I think, the rest of these guys internationally. Let's keep our game as close to that as possible. But I'd like to have some of that flexibility. I'd like to have that discussion. Those would be the 2 things I'd have.
I think I'd have a minimum of national TV matches for especially for our Power 5 teams. Go to the Big Ten, say, hey, you got to have at least 3 to 5 nationally televised matches. because I think that's going to grow the game as much as anything. I mean, we've talked a lot about that exposure. I think the other small thing, too, would just be at the junior level, try to extend the serving space, because I think that's a big transition. I think it's the toughest part of young guys coming in is the serve and pass, because there's just no space to serve. So then they get a lot of easy floaters, and they come to the college gym, and it's guys taking long approaches and hitting it hard, and there's not something they're used to. But I think you get used to that. You see more of that, that high level serving if you have a little more space, and who knows what that can create. Like you said, you see something, maybe he can do it, maybe I can do it, and I think that can increase the level of play too.
I agree with Pav. Do a double contact. I think the thought process has to be, if somebody walks off the street and has never seen volleyball, what is going to resonate with them? What's going to make sense to them? So the double contact is one of them. The over calls. Nobody knows what an over is. Nobody calls it right. The referees don't know what an over call is.
Explain that to Mitch.
Yeah.
So Mitch, if you're a back row attacker, you can't go over, but how that's judged is completely subjective and often inaccurate. You can't reach over the net on the second contact. When I used to play short court with Nygaard, his signature move was on my second contact. His big long arm would come over and he would block my set.
I never heard of whistle, John.
I've never been more frustrated. So I think you should be able to do that. I don't think there should be any restriction. If the ball is near the net and you can grab it, you should grab it, because I think it is even the most curious call that we see from referees today anyway. So just do away with it. And what would happen actually is that you'd have to be forced to pass the ball off the net, and you'd probably end up with a few more rallies. I think the two things I hear a lot about with women, well, maybe the number one thing I hear about with women is people like the rallies. I think there's something to be said for that. I think they probably discount the number of rallies that actually occur in a men's game. I think the biggest problem we have on the men's game right now is not the rallies, it's the missed serves. Right now, the way the game is structured is there's no, well, let's see, how should I phrase this? The disadvantage to missed serves is not significant enough. We are forced to be in a position, because it is such a strong power game, that we need to hit our serve really hard. And there is no correlation between winning and losing volleyball matches and service errors. And I know that's really hard for a lot of people to try and wrap their brain around, particularly a casual fan. The number one thing you do hear about fans when they watch volleyball is, why would you miss a serve? And the casual fan doesn't understand the percentages that we're looking at right now and the detail at which we can look at those percentages.
It's very true. I'm sitting here. I've thought that stuff before.
Yeah, there's no correlation. It's crazy. I have to look at the spreadsheets that my stats guy gives me, Nate Go, with the national team, and he's learned R, and he's got all these programs, and I don't know what the heck it means. But what it does mean, Mitch, is that you just have to hit your serve hard, and you probably have to serve it in hard. But if you miss a bunch of serves, you're going to lose. But if you serve it too easy, you're going to lose. So you might as well just serve hard, and then that's what you got to do. And the missed serve component is really difficult for people to understand. It's hard for me to emotionally detach myself from all the missed serves, knowing that I have to serve it hard and that it's not going to matter winning or losing. We won a set versus Princeton already this year when we had 11 missed serves in the set. We won the set. And so, which is just mind-boggling. So we have to change the rules in order to deal with that, because I think that we have to deal with that fan. And so we experimented with I don't even know if you guys knew this. We experimented this fall with
it was fun.
It was fun. It was interesting because it went to the tactical aspect of it, Pav, is that we had 5 missed serves and you're out of the game, out of the match. Just like in basketball, you get 5 fouls. Volleyball, now you get 5 missed serves and you're out. And that led to some more if you did that, you probably would have to go to 6 subs with a little bit more variety in there, because it was a little bit more of, my best guy just got – it's like fouls in basketball. Your guy gets a couple fouls early. You take him out, put him on the bench for 5 minutes, so you're trying to minimize his ability to get a third, because then you're in trouble if he's out for the rest of the half, right? So it's the same kind of thing that we were doing, and it was not – I mean, what did you think? You played with it.
you had to make sure that you were paying attention, because if your guy's hitting 500 and he's sitting on 4, you had to be strategic about, well, you're just going to the back line. It's like, nah, not this time. Yeah. But what ended up being even more fun is watching the guys on the bench. They were counting.
Yes.
They were heckling the other team. That's
Yeah.
3. Here comes 4.
That's right.
So they really attached to it too. So they had a blast, and that just added another layer.
I mean, just as a casual fan, that adds more excitement right there. You just describing that type of stuff. It's another element that changes the game for the casual fans. Like, okay, now I'm counting. All right, you're at 3, you're at 4. What comes next? Because when you think about basketball, it's, oh, he's at 4. They're going to go at him. Here comes 5.
Yeah.
Well, who knows what happens. But
especially you get into a 5-game match, or you're in a long 4-game match, and it's like, okay.
Yeah, so I think you just to finish up your initial question, I think we have to constantly be thinking about what little subtleties do we need to adjust to for the television audience, for the casual fan that's walking off the street that hasn't seen it before. We have to resonate with athletic directors, and ultimately we have to resonate with college presidents in order to get this thing done. Burch mentioned just some of the things at the youth level. I think there's some things that we could do with some innovation at the youth level to develop our athletes better. I think it would be really interesting to not let players specialize by position until they get to maybe age 16, something like that. I don't know, debate the age, but I think that concept is maybe play 4s at the younger ages, something like that. I'd like to lower the net so they could actually jump and hit at the younger ages. There's a lot of things you could do at the youth level that I think would help our development. I'd like to see us have a full-time youth national team coach. That's been actually approved for funding. I've been pushing that for almost all 7 years I've been national team coach. That finally came through, so we'll see what happens there. What else? I could use, and I don't say this facetiously, the knowledge that we now have about how to grow the men's game, because we've been working on it intentionally and had somebody whose specific job it is in Wade Gerard to just grow men's volleyball and to learn what we need to do. The number that we need to raise is not that high to have significant impact in terms of how we could change the game forever. We've talked about $25 million over a period of time. I can't remember what the end date was on that, and it's been, as we looked at it, I don't think we need to raise 25. If someone would like to send me that, I can get you my contact information. However, I think for 10 million, maybe 11, 12, somewhere in there, you could really do some incredible things. We now know, which was never known before, what it's going to take financially to get a Division II school. We now know what it's going to take financially to get an NAIA school, which we did initially with specific goals. We now know what it'll take to potentially get a state to sanction high school volleyball, and what potentially we need to do financially in order to improve our odds there. We now know what it's going to take to get a Power 5. We've met with several ADs. I'm meeting with a Power 5 AD in the next couple weeks, and he's specifically interested in this, and we're going to talk money. And we now know what it's going to take financially to get a mid-major Division I team. And with that knowledge that we now have, we now know what it's going to take to do X, Y, and Z. And I think for $10 million, we could probably change the landscape of men's volleyball significantly. And so that's my number one push right now, is to raise money for that initiative and to have all the meetings that we need to have in order to make that happen.
I think it's interesting when you guys talk about funding. You brought it up as well. All of you have at some point. But one of the hottest topics in the collegiate game right now is name, image, and likeness. And should we pay these student athletes and everything like that? Where do you guys stand on that, knowing that it could change the landscape of things? It could change where guys go, what sports they play, how they go about their business. Now you're talking endorsement deals. You're talking tons of different things. Where do you guys stand on name, image, and likeness, and really the funding aspect of all of that stuff?
That's a Wild West type of scenario now, because there's so many unknowns to that. And I know what everybody thinks it's going to be or what they want it to be, I don't know if we really have an idea of how reality is going to shake out yet. I think there are some things that could really benefit this day and age's student athletes. I think there are some realities in this day and age of collegiate economics that is going to take smarter people than I am to even identify it and apply it. I'm more curious right now than anything else. I think initially you're going to have, at least with our with our sport, 1 or 2% of the guys could be affected. Maybe. It's going to be an interesting road once they decide which road to go down.
If you're reading all the quotes that are coming out of Anaheim right now with the athletic directors annual meeting, they don't know either. I know that there's been some official statements from the UC, and I'm not even sure what I'm allowed to express about this issue. It is interesting for me to see a player that I have like Kofi. So Danon Kofi Jima is a middle blocker on my team, and he's a exceptionally talented musician. And he's been able to produce music, produce beats, sell beats. Now he's producing music. Now he just signed a deal with Red Bull Records. And the amount of time he's had to spend in the compliance office over the last 2 years has been mind-boggling. And so it's a weekly meeting. I mean, our compliance officer knows all of his management team by name. I mean, it's cumbersome. What he is he's a talented musician that has nothing to do with his volleyball skill. And so I think you do look at some of these personal examples, which maybe we don't have tons of right now, but he is an exceptional example. And you do wonder to yourself, guys, there's got to be an easier way. I think there's some realities of the situation. I think the NC2A is going to have to do something because California kicked it all off with that law. And then sure enough, I'm not sure how many states have it now, but a bunch. And so if they don't figure out how to get everybody on the same page and probably get the federal government involved to make sure that everybody has a singular understanding of what the rules are, it is going to be, I think you use the Wild Wild West. I mean, it'll be the Wild Wild West. I mean, when it first came out, Gene was saying, we're not going to play any schools from California because that's going to be too big of a competitive advantage. So, I mean, you can see where this could really spin out to be something that's really complex, and I think you're seeing that based on what you're hearing from Anaheim right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think the big thing is getting everybody on the same page and making sure it's not a one-state thing to eliminate that potential competitive advantage. That's Gene's big thing, is making sure that it's all federal law, that it's all NCAA's message, it's all singular, all on the same page.
You know, we met with Gene too, and he was super gracious as well.
Awesome,
I mean, in terms of helping us figure out what our steps needed to be for First Point, and he met with Wade and I and Pete, and really was grateful that he gave us that time. I know he's a busy guy, one of the lead ADs in the country.
All right, we're going to wrap this thing up. I know you guys got other business to take care of today, but I want you to go around the table one more time. We'll go right to left this time and give us your final thoughts for the casual fan that has watched this, consumed this, listened to it, whatever it is, as to really what your message is to that appeal, to that fan base, and I mean, what should intrigue them more going down the road?
I think what we've seen in our research is that when people get exposed to volleyball, when they step into a gym, actually watch men's volleyball for the first time, and not just on TV, certainly that's part of it, but when they are able to observe in person the physicality, the athleticism, it is very compelling. Most people see it and they can't believe what they see. And so I would just encourage everybody to give us a shot. Come see it. And for boys that are playing it, play it. I think most of the time boys play it for the first time and they realize, wait a minute, this is really fun. And so I just want either the casual fan or the young boy that's playing the game right now, another sport potentially, come play the game. Give it a shot. If you give it a shot, you're going to find out what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, you look at entrepreneurs, you watch Shark Tank, they talk about retention, how many customers come back and buy again, and I think the retention rate for the casual fan once they come one time is going to be pretty high. really high. I think it's just a matter of getting them in the gym and watching a match. I think they're going to be able to stay and keep coming.
Yeah, and I think part of that is get to know the stories of the kids you're watching. Every one of us have a great bunch of guys on our team, and if you can know the stories behind those guys and what they're doing at this stage of their life, and fall in love with the sport, you're not gonna the group that's playing collegiate men's volleyball over the whatever era you're looking at are pretty special kids, and I don't want to shortchange their efforts in what we're trying to do here either.
Every day I drop my kids off at school, I say, I love you, be a good person, surround yourself with even better people. And you're asking what the collegiality of this group is. I think in my experience, and I've played multiple sports, is that, and this is not an indictment about other people that I've played with, but just the way that volleyball feels is collaborative. It's good people. It's a community. And it's a great thing to be a part of, because I get to sit here and speak with these fine folks on this day, and I feel blessed that I have volleyball in my life. I mean, growing up in Wisconsin, it's like, did I ever think I'd do all the things I did? I got to travel, I got to do all these different things, and like I met my wife at a volleyball tournament. So I just feel blessed that I have volleyball.
All right, Kevin, so if we're going on Shark Tank, you guys other three, who's going to walk away with the deal?
Whew, that's a good one.
I'm taking you back to Rec Hall.
Yeah, Burch is winning now.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, we'll find out maybe down the road at some point. But guys, appreciate you stopping by. Really appreciate you guys doing this, and continued success down the road. All right.
Thanks,
Mitch.
Thank you, Mitch.